Hey, would you open in your Bibles to Nehemiah chapter 4? It's our last Sunday to study the book of Nehemiah. Next week, we're going to start a series called Marriage Matters. Marriage Matters. We want to talk about, for an extended time, we've not ever spent 8 weeks on the subject of marriage before. And we're going to not just cover matters of marriage, things and issues that people deal with, but I want us to look at the big picture of marriage. There's the institution of marriage is under assault in our culture, and it's underappreciated and undervalued. And we hope to elevate the value of it, to say marriage is important, marriage matters, and then along the way to give you some helps as well in your relationship, in your marriage relationship, to say that marriage is important. But I want all of us, single or married, whatever marital status we have, to come out of that marriage series going, you know what, this marriage, this is a big deal. No wonder God started with a family. He didn't start with a business. He didn't start with a church. He didn't start with a school. He didn't start with a government. He started with a marriage, a man and a woman. And we're going to see why God puts that institution on the level that he does. The question was this: when have you experienced a great sense of unity? It was the question was asked last Sunday, and it was part of our home group Bible study that we were doing during the Bible hour at 10:30 last week. And right away, somebody in my group spoke up and said, after 9/11. And they were describing, they said, after 9/11, I experienced unity like I never have since and never had before. All over the United States, no matter what the economic level, no matter what the political party, no matter what the race or ethnicity, there was all kinds of unity. Everybody was rallying around the United States, and we sort of circled the wagons, if you will, around the borders, the boundary of the United States, and to say this is evil, this is wrong, and we support each other in this. Now, for most of August, we've been studying the book of Nehemiah. The story focuses on the city of Jerusalem and its dreadful state of disrepair. 140 years before the account that we're reading, an enemy army came in and wiped out the city, burned the gates with fire, knocked over the walls, and the rubble and the burned buildings remained. The scars were still there, and nobody for 14 decades thought, I should maybe do something about it. We should rally some people and clean up around here. Maybe we could rebuild part of the wall. Nobody did that. They got used to it. That's just the way it is. Nothing we can do about it. And one guy, Nehemiah, rallied people together to say, this is unacceptable. This doesn't work. The condition of this world around us is unacceptable. We've got to do something about it. And that's what we're reading about. And so he spread people around the wall. Last week it was kind of fascinating to look at how all of these different people around the wall had all these different jobs. And people without a lot of skills. There were merchants and goldsmiths. And here they were doing construction work. And then do you remember the one particular group of people had a job that was, well, less than desirable, shall we say. And they tackled it. He was one of the leaders, and he dove right into one of the more challenging aspects. Today I want to look at this restoration project and the opposition that occurred, because you can mark it down. As soon as you start to do something positive with your life and to make a difference in the brokenness that exists in our world, somebody's going to criticize that. Some kind of opposition is going to rise up. And while I want every bike ride to be downhill and I want it all to just be easy and to flow and to just come, it doesn't happen like that. And the day you start to say, I'm going to do something about the bad habits in my life, and I'm going to do something about the rubble in my life, I'm going to do something in my family, we're going to start taking initiative and seeking after God. The day you start to do that is the day the enemy starts losing territory, and he's not going to give ground without a fight. And you'll find that happens. Progress always means pain. There's always going to be some hardship when it comes to progress. It's why a lot of people don't make any progress, because there's a cost, there's a price to pay to move forward. So I want to look at some of the opposition and what they did, and then how do we respond to that? How do we grow through it? Chapter 4 of Nehemiah, verse 1. But it happened when Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall, that he was furious and indignant and mocked the Jews. And he spoke before his brethren in the army of Samaria, and he said, what are these feeble Jews doing? Will they fortify themselves? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they complete it in a day? Will they revive the stones from the heaps of rubbish, stones that are burned? And Tobiah the Ammonite was beside him, and he said, whatever they build, even if a fox goes up on it, he will break down their stone wall. So the first tactic that he uses is ridicule. Ridicule. John Maxwell, a former pastor and author and speaker on the subject of leadership, he talks about crabs in a bucket. And he says if you put a bunch of crabs in a bucket, that one of those crabs is going to try to crawl out. But all the other crabs don't like the one crab that's trying to get out of the bucket. So they'll all start reaching for and grabbing at the crab that's trying to get out and pull them back into the bucket. So another crab will start trying to get out, and then all the other crabs are grabbing at that one to pull them back in. And the gravity, the effort that it takes to break the gravitational pull is greater. A rocket, to get out of Earth's gravity, has to reach something like 25,000 miles an hour to break the gravitational pull of the Earth. And when you're talking about getting out of the bucket, and here Nehemiah is like, let's get rid of this rubble. Let's do something about this problem. Let's start solving problems around here instead of talking about them. There's crabs pulling them back in the bucket. And the first tactic was ridicule. Even if they build the wall, a fox is going to knock it over. A little animal is all it's going to take. Sanballat was one of them, a guy named Tobiah. And we'll find out that there's even more people that get on board, because opposition, criticism is contagious. Now, vision is easy to criticize. Nehemiah had this vision. Let's rebuild the wall so we're no longer a reproach. Let's do something about the brokenness that we see. And there's criticism. And anytime somebody has an idea, a vision, let's solve something, it's easy to criticize. And it gets criticized for two reasons. It gets criticized, number one, because it represents change, and there's people who have a stake in the status quo. Sanballat and Tobiah, these enemies of the Jews, had a stake in the Jews remaining weak and vulnerable, in having the wall broken down, in having no defenses. Vision represents change. And so it brings out people's insecurities, because people grow secure. In their case, they're used to the pile of rubble. They're used to the gates burned. But another reason that it brings that out, that vision is easy to criticize, not just the change factor, but because there's gaps in a vision. A vision is the big idea. It hasn't wrestled yet with the details. And so the critics love to take a vision. Let's do something about the brokenness in our world. And then they love to break it down and start criticizing the details. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? What's wrong with this? That can't be done because this is the situation. We could say it like this. A team tries to fill the gaps. A critic tries to expose the gaps. You've been in a room, you've been in a planning meeting, you've been hearing somebody explain some vision, some idea to do something about a problem, to bring some solution to bear. And you've heard somebody step up and say, there's a gap and I'll fill it. I see a little hole in your vision, in your plan. Count me in. And you've also heard other people just expose them. Have you thought about, sounds like you haven't thought about this yet. Sounds like you haven't considered that. A second tactic is resistance. Look at verse 7 and 8. Now it happened when Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, the Ammonites, the Ashdodites heard that the walls of Jerusalem were being restored and the gaps were beginning to be closed, and they got angry. And they conspired together to come and attack Israel and create confusion. They were surrounded. That group of people in verse 7, there's several groups, but they represent the north, the south, the east, and the west. Have you ever been criticized by one or two people, but it feels like 100? John Maxwell, again to quote, he said that the average pastor leaves a church because of 5 people. But it feels like 100. It feels like 100. And I remember very early in ministry, I was a youth pastor, and a lady came to see me, and she said, everybody's talking about, people are telling me this and this. And her second time in, I finally realized she means her. But she's saying it like it's 100 people. Everybody's talking about this. Everybody thinks you're doing this wrong. You think people are talking. One day, it was somebody else giving me the same line, and I had kind of grown from that. And I remember I said to them, why are all these negative people coming to you? What is it about you that listens to all these negative people? She loved to expose the gaps, not fill them. The third tactic was rumors. Look at verse 11. And our adversary said, these are the Jews talking, but the rumors are just driving them crazy. They will neither know nor see anything till we come into their midst and kill them and cause the work to cease. So it was when the Jews who dwelt near them came that they told us 10 times, whatever place you turn, they'll be upon us. So they're like, no matter where we look, the bad guys are coming. They're coming, and over, they're hearing it 10 times. They keep hearing it. They grew exaggerated as they got repeated. And so they wore out. Verse 10, the strength of the laborers is failing. And there's so much rubbish. We're not able to build the wall. So they're worn out. Fatigue is an effect of that. Man, everybody starts wearing out when they're listening. They're frustrated. There's too much rubble. How many people haven't made any progress for God or life or their garage for that matter because there's too much stuff in there? Where would I even start? Ooh, I didn't expect that kind of reaction. We're talking, you're laughing hopefully maybe about your garage or the attic or something like that. But how many people don't seek after God because they think there's too much rubble? There's too much broken there. God wouldn't want somebody like me. Where would God even start? I don't even know where to start. But as soon as I clean up my act, then I'll come back to God. And God's saying, come to me. I'll do something about the rubble in your life. So what's the right response? The first one is to rely on God. Rely on God. Nehemiah was a man of prayer, and in verse 4 he prayed. Maybe you've wanted to pray this way, and verse 4 and 5 will give you permission. Look there. Hear, O God, for we are despised. Turn their reproach on their own heads and give them as plunder to a land of captivity. Do not cover their iniquity and do not let their sin be blotted out from before you, for they've provoked you to anger before the... Anybody ever wanted to pray for their enemies like that? Don't let them get away with it. Blast them. Zap them. Do whatever you have to do to make them pay. Nehemiah might be giving you permission there. Verse 9 I like a lot. When we've met with our security team, I say this is our security team's key verse. Verse 9. We made our prayer to God, and because of them we set a watch. So we're going to pray and be on guard. We're not going to just pray and do nothing. We're going to pray and be on guard. And then verse 13, take a look there. Therefore I positioned men behind the lower parts of the wall at the openings, and I set people according to their families with their swords, their spears, and their bows. He found the weak points, the low points in the wall, and he put extra people at the weak points. He reinforced the weak points. Verse 14 is here. We're going to camp and finish. I looked and arose and said to the nobles and to the leaders and to the rest of the people, do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, great and awesome, and fight for your brethren, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your houses. He says, fight for your family. He took this big dream. We got to rebuild the city because we're an embarrassment to God. We're left vulnerable. The city's vulnerable. The walls are broken down. But then he eventually gets to the point where he says, okay, forget all that. It's time to fight for your family. Your children, your sons and your daughters, your wives. You see, the critics forced them to see where they were weak and see where they were vulnerable and do something about it. How many people have looked out at our culture and then just gone with the flow? It's too hard. It's uphill. It's too difficult. I don't see how I can fight it. I might as well just join them. He says, fight for your family. It's about your sons and your daughters. He's trying to say to them, look at what is at stake. Don't go casual with God. Something serious is at stake here. If only we would begin to think about the generational impact of our actions. I'm haunted by what a parent said to me years ago. We just didn't take it serious. It was after the kids were grown and out of the house. We just didn't take it serious. And Nehemiah's plea rings today. There's a generation at risk, totally dependent on us taking our faith serious to do something about the condition of our own lives and the condition of our world. And do you know that when the parents stood in the gap, the enemy did not attack? When Nehemiah positioned them at their place in the wall to fight for their families, when the parents recognized what was at stake and took it serious, the enemy didn't attack. Now, parents, when you're casual about your faith, the next generation's watching all that and they think, well, I don't want to pretend. I don't want to go through the motions. I don't want to be fake. I'm going to do something else. The most important thing you can do to build your faith into the next generation is to live an authentic Christian life yourself. The spiritual formation of your young person is hanging in the balance, and the wicked one would love nothing more than to get his hands on them. Now, Satan doesn't have to turn them into devil worshipers. All he has to do is make them complacent. All he has to do is get parents to say, well, it's not that big a deal. We don't have to get that carried away. We need a generation of people to believe that God wants to do something about the rubble in our community. That he wants to do something about it. There's a phrase that I identified a few years ago that just runs through the back of my mind. And it's the phrase relentless optimism. I just believe that today is the breakthrough for somebody else. That next Sunday is going to be the breakthrough. That every week as we lead up to Sunday, that it's going to be the breakthrough. A relentless optimism. We sang some songs about relentless optimism. God's not done yet. I've been watching him move. I've seen him work. And he's not finished yet. Because he's the God of the city and greater things are yet to come. Now you look at your own life and you say, man, I've got some rubble there. And it's been that way a long time and I've grown used to things. God is not finished working in your life. He's not even hardly gotten started and he's got so much farther for you to go. Don't get used to the rubble. Don't get used to the scars. He wants to bring healing to that. He wants to rebuild so that you've got spiritual strength and fortitude. You're not weak and vulnerable anymore. Now, these walls remained broken for 140 years. That means generations of people came and went, unwilling to fight for their families. Until one guy rallied him. There's generations at stake. May God help us to do something.